And welcome to the latest in the series of Facebook Live sessions that I'm holding around the Force area. My name is John Campion and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. Tonight's session will be focusing on policing in North Worcestershire, and it's, as I say, part of a series that we've been holding in all 5 of the local policing areas in West Mercia. My role as Police and Crime Commissioner is to not only set the policing strategy, set the policing budget, to hold the force to account, and also to ensure that I hear the views of the public. Normally, as part of a series of summer activities, we'd be engaged at events across the force area, including in North Worcestershire, but like many parts of our lives at the moment, those events aren't happening. So we're using these Facebook Live sessions to talk about local issues to the communities, and also to talk about some of the community messages and indeed the messages around how we can be safer. So tonight I am joined by one of my colleagues and 2 colleagues from the force, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Mark, did you want to go first?
Yeah, good evening everybody. My name's Mark Colquhoun. I'm the local policing area superintendent for North Worcestershire. Just sort of briefly in terms of my background and my career, I've been a police officer for 28 years now. 10 years of that was with Surrey Police. I then transferred to West Mercia the past 18 years with West Mercia. In fact, when I came across to West Mercia, North Worcestershire was my starting location. I began as a sergeant on response team at Kidderminster. So I was really, really pleased as a superintendent to get North Worcestershire as my command and come back. So my time within West Mercia has been split between detective duties. Prior to my current role, I was in force operations, which deals with issues around firearms, roads policing, and then came to North Worcestershire in January. So really, really happy to be here. I'm the commander of the officers for the North Worcestershire area, which obviously covers Kidderminster, Bromsgrove and Redditch. And in addition to that, I still fulfil some specialist responsibilities around commanding public order incidents, firearms incidents, and I'm a hostage and crisis negotiator, which most of the time is dealing with people in crisis who are potentially contemplating taking their own lives and talking to them. So that's me.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Hopefully we won't need the hostage negotiation skills in the session tonight, but you never know. Rachel?
Good evening. I'm Rachel Jones. I'm the very recently appointed Assistant Chief Constable for local policing and operations. So I have responsibility for local policing across the whole of West Mercia, Mark being your local policing commander. And I also have the operations portfolio, which are supporting functions, for example, the operations or public contact centre, and then specialist functions such as dogs, firearms and roads policing. I said I've recently arrived. This is the start of my 3rd week here in West Mercia, so clearly feet well under the table. I've come from West Midlands, where I've served 12 years and across a variety of portfolios from a number of local policing commands, but so too Force CID, public protection, which is your child and vulnerable adult protection, and a number of programmes. I spent 12 years in West Midlands, and prior to which I started my career in Gloucestershire, and 12 years there through the ranks from PC and local policing right through to Director of Intelligence Superintendent. So I have a sort of more rural as well as a metropolitan background, but actually I live and have lived all but 12 years of my life in West Mercia, in particular in Worcestershire, but Herefordshire too. And I'm absolutely delighted to be responsible for policing my home turf, so to speak.
Excellent. Well, welcome. And Tracy?
Hi there, I'm Tracy Onslow and I'm Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for West Mercia. I have been for 4 years with John. I major in the commissioning of services for John, so domestic abuse, children's services, diversionary network and community engagement, so some of the summer events and going out to see the town councils, etc.
Excellent, thank you all, and it's good to be with us this evening. Mark, if I could start with, really, we've had quite an extraordinary time as a community. The last 3 months, we've seen us as a society challenged and had lots of our freedoms taken away. and indeed I think the police challenged in terms of the role that they play in that. We police by consent very proudly in this country. I would argue that we've probably got the best relationship between the police and the community anywhere in the world because of that model here in the United Kingdom and in West Mercia. You guys have seen that challenged in the last 3 months and how that's worked, but actually I would say that's been pretty successful in terms of maintaining that consent through those very difficult times because of the leadership, because of the way that your colleagues have been executing their duties. But it must have been a challenge during those last 3 months as they had to explore those new powers and those new responsibilities while still maintaining that trust and confidence.
Yeah, no, it has been, I think, a challenging time. I mean, I came into post on the 6th of January. On the 14th of February, so 3 weeks later, I chaired the first meeting of our LRF, so Local Resilience Forum, a multi-agency meeting around the flooding. And then that continued to chair that meeting every single day from the 14th of Feb through until the 6th of March, and then from that straight into COVID. So it's been one really significant operational ongoing incident from the beginning of February through until now. And in some senses, the flooding was easier in that as an emergency service, we understand what that looks like in terms of the problem, the risk, what the consequences of that is, and how we contribute to going about managing it. Whereas I think with COVID, it's been far more unknown. And albeit I've been heavily involved in the Local Resilience Forum in terms of managing the COVID response within Worcestershire, I think as a service, we have had to, as you say, get used to new pieces of legislation and then work out the best way to implement those. And I think my experience is that largely society polices itself, and that largely if you treat people as adults and you invite them to take responsibility for their own lives, that they're more than happy to do so and will do so successfully. And sometimes that means we need to become involved to offer a bit of information or to give a bit of guidance or steer people in a particular direction or away from a particular direction. But the need to enforce the legislation, the need to prosecute, take a harder tactical line with people, we haven't had to do it that much. So, I mean, people may be familiar, we've taken a 4 E's approach during the COVID lockdown around engaging with people, explaining to them, encouraging people to do the right thing, and only leaving enforcement as a last option. And in the main, that's been really successful. And, you know, I think our communities and the public have to take a huge amount of credit for the personal responsibility that they've taken so far. I think that's going to be challenging going forward. I think it's particularly difficult at the moment as lockdown eases and people are seeing wanting naturally to resume their normal life. But actually we had a teleconference this morning with partners around this, and public health within the county were making the point that the vast majority of people in Worcestershire have not had COVID, have not interacted with the virus, and would still be vulnerable to catching it and potentially vulnerable to falling seriously ill. So it feels as if we've gone all through a long journey, and you can understand the temptation why people feel that the easing of some of the restrictions feels like we're coming out of it, but actually we're not. We're still in the middle of a pandemic, and it is really, really important that the public stick to the guidelines as best they can to protect themselves and their loved ones.
You and your colleagues over the last 3 months have obviously also been dealing with the same things that we've all been dealing with as individuals, in terms of worried about our health, worried about our family's health, worried about all the other bits and pieces. But yet the service still been maintained, 999 calls answered, the vulnerable protected, all of the crime fighting work that and the safeguarding work that the Force does has carried on continually through. We have seen some drops in some crime types, but you have seen some crime types also rise. I'm thinking such as domestic abuse and those kinds of crimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just looking at the figures. So in terms of statistics, year to date, so between, if you compare April to June this year versus April to June last year, there's been an overall reduction in North Worcestershire of around 27% of crime has reduced overall in total. And pretty much every single crime type has reduced. The two main exceptions to that have been in terms of antisocial behaviour incidents, which actually doubled during that period, so that's gone up 100%. And the reason for that, when you dig into it, is not so much that antisocial behaviour as you might normally think about it has gone up. It's more that in the initial stages of COVID, when members of the public phoned up to report a breach of the regulations, that someone wasn't adhering to the regulations, we recorded those messages from members of the public reporting those breaches as incidents of antisocial behaviour. So that really explains why that number has gone up as much as it has. In terms of domestic abuse, over that same period of time, the first 3 months of the year within North Worcestershire, it's gone up about 5.5%. But I would take that with a slight degree of caution. That's the amount of increase that's been reported to us. So that's the recorded crime. I think we feel that abuse has probably gone up more than that within domestic environments, but it's probably been underreported during the same sort of period. It's been more difficult for some people to report. And now we're starting to see some of the services come back online, like GP interaction a bit more. We're starting to get increases in reporting through those sort of third-party mechanisms. So domestic abuse has been a particular worry, I think, during this period in time. And it does feel like that we've had more incidents of domestic abuse, and that some of those have been at a far more serious level and a more significant degree of assault than we might otherwise sort of normally see. So it's been a mixed picture.
You would have seen, Mark, over your policing career that the gradual shift to the position now, which is that case of the police having to police in somebody's private home, often in that private space. And I think domestic violence, domestic abuse is one of those last areas that we as a society have got to finish that journey to make sure those who can't call home their safe place absolutely get the right protection, and those that are perpetrating it get the feel justice, but also feel the benefit of helping to change their offending behaviour. I know, Tracy, you've done a lot in terms of the amount of services that we commission that support not only survivors, but also support those who want to get help and seeking help in that situation, who might not ordinarily go to the police.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to say actually then that the government have increased our funding substantially around the area of domestic abuse to increase services, because they obviously anticipated that you know, when everybody is locked down at home together, as much as it's nice to have the extra time, if your home isn't your safe place, you know, it could be a real pressure point. So those services are there, and just to encourage people that when and if they can, to tell somebody, so that help can be given to them. But I wanted to sort of ask Mark really whether, obviously when the public are being told that they aren't allowed to have the freedoms they usually can have, and then police are having to enforce that as well. I just wondered how Mark had found those sort of engagements with the public in that area, how the public had reacted.
I think most of the time, and this is, I think it's generally true. If you give people a why, if you give people a reason as to why you're asking someone to do something, and most of the time people genuinely understand. I mean, there's very few members of the public who don't know somebody who is vulnerable to one degree or another, whether it's an elderly relative, whether it's a friend. So I do think people understand, and I think some of the times it's I feel quite sorry for the government, because the government can't give a set of regulations that take into account every single circumstance that covers everybody's lives and their personal family situation and their friendships and their dynamics. So I do think to a large degree there is an element upon which we are asking the public to exercise their common sense, to behave as adults and think things through and do the right thing. And occasionally that hasn't been the case, but most of the time when our officers have gone and engaged with members of the public who have been breaching the regulations, and most of the time people have amended their behaviour. Oh dear, that wasn't great. Oh dear, that'll be the one bit that gets me played, won't it? But most of the time, I think
we thought it was you
genuinely
that's fallen over.
yeah, I think my phone got bored of my answer and decided to tip over. Most of the time, I think the public understand what's going on and respond to it. And I think it's not the police as enforcers, or we're not trying to tell people how to live their lives. We're trying to explain to people what the rules are and appeal to, the angels of their better nature. And most of the time, people are very, very responsive to that, I think.
And that's an important part for me. The vast majority of the public are compliant and supportive. So as we move into the next phase of easing those social restrictions, as you referred to, I just wondered whether it's worth asking Rachel. I know very new in post, but quite a big change this weekend. I myself am looking forward to be able to go for a swim, but they're not opening those on Saturday. I also need my lockdown haircut adjusting because one side is lower than the other, but I won't be queuing up for that. But there'll be lots of people who've been waiting to go to a pub and to see some of our nighttime economy restarting. From a force-wide perspective, and then I'll ask Mark about more North Worcestershire, a force-wide perspective, just briefly outlining the preparations that the force have got for that happening.
So we have, over the last few months, changed our resourcing levels to adapt to some of the demands that have come out of COVID, but also in recognition that things like our nighttime economy in particular have closed down. In anticipation of a busy nighttime economy this weekend with the pubs opening up, we have ramped up our operation to cover those later hours and into the early hours of the morning. We're also engaging licensees to support them in what are very different operational environments for them, having to comply with the COVID restrictions whilst clearly also wanting to attract people into their premises and get businesses that have been dormant for a long time up and running again. So very much employing the sort of engagement and explaining process, not only with members of the public, but also licensees to help them manage what will be undoubtedly a busy nighttime economy this coming weekend. So really, absolutely endorse people having fun, but as we've seen that sensible, responsible activity over the course of the last few months, we'd very much encourage individuals to enjoy themselves but act responsibly as they hit the streets in the nighttime economy this weekend.
So Mark, in North Worcestershire, I know town centres in Wyre Forest, Bromsgrove and Redditch do have a thriving nighttime economy for one, and I suppose it's just your message to those that might be itching to for their first pint or their first glass of wine or whatever their tipple is, just about how we get the nighttime economy restarted again safely, etc. And just wondered what your messages are to the public out there.
Well, I think firstly, policing the nighttime economy isn't something that's new to us. It's a core business sort of function. So it feels like it's new, having gone through 3 months of not having it. But this is normality. I think the other thing is not to try and see it as a negative. Actually, that businesses will be opening up again, that we're one step getting back to normal life, that people can go out and enjoy themselves and enjoy their friends, and that businesses can start to get the economy moving. That's a positive thing. It's a good thing. And most people will be absolutely fine, and most people will be sensible. So I think the message would just be, be sensible, take it easy. It's probably the regulations will need some kind of working through, and people will need to be patient with the business and just sort of be sensible, and enjoy yourselves and have a good time and go home at the end of it safe and sound. And for the minority, if there is a minority who can't or won't be sensible, if they commit offences, then my officers will be there and those offences will be dealt with. So we will enforce. And if people break the law and if there's any disorder, then it will be dealt with, and it will be dealt with firmly. But that is the last place we want to be. And most of the time, the vast majority of the public are perfectly capable of going out on a Saturday night, enjoying a beer and a drink with their friends. So what I would ask is, make it work. If this is going to be a little bit of new normality, which appears to be the most overused sort of phrase at the moment. But if it's going to be the new normal for a bit, you know, make it work. Work with the businesses, work with us, have a good time, and then go home at the end, having had an enjoyable and safe evening.
Tracy?
I was just going to say, when you were saying about the new normal, because although there are an awful lot of things that will be different, the one for me about getting home safely, which always came as a shock to me, was around the sort of rivers and the waterways in our areas, because it wasn't until I came into this role that I just realised exactly how many accidental drownings, people falling into rivers, that happens across West Mercia, and that's a risk as much now as it always has been, isn't it?
So obviously we've got some lovely inland waterways here in North Worcestershire, and some just off your patch as well that I know lots of North Worcestershire residents go. And we saw it recently, Mark, in the with the warm weather. You wouldn't know it today, would you? A week ago it was 30 degrees, and today it's about 13 degrees. We see too many people in this country and in our area getting into trouble in water, and indeed cold water shock sets in. Obviously, private land is private land, and you're not the fire and rescue service or responsible for policing the water, as it were. But just interested in your attitude as a commander and your local officers around how we try and keep people safe and out of the water.
Well, I mean, we support the Home and Dry campaign, which is there, and then, I mean, the main message is don't go into the water in the first place. We have a couple of quarries that are local to us, albeit just on the sort of South Worcestershire border, albeit that makes no difference to the public at all. And again, I think it's a question of responsibility. I think one of the most distressing things of being a police officer is seeing tragedy and seeing people's lives change and it being avoidable death, because bottom line, that's what it comes down to. And when, as a police officer, you have to go up to someone's front door and you know that there's someone inside that house and their life is about to change forever based upon what you're about to tell them, you know, it really brings it home to you. So it's understandable, and particularly in the hot weather that we had, and particularly young people who their opportunities to have fun with their friends have closed down somewhat this summer, that they want to go out and enjoy themselves. But there are real dangers to these open water areas, and particularly if people have consumed alcohol. So you say the temperature in these quarries of the water is really low, and within a very short period of time people's bodies can go into a hypothermic reaction, and we see people unfortunately die every year. So, you know, don't let it be you, and don't let it be one of your friends. And swimming pools will be reopened, I think, in the not too distant future, so hold out for that moment.
Mark, even before the lockdown restrictions, we'd seen some really noticeable successes in North Worcestershire with the reduction in burglary, for example, following some really concerted effort around smart water and we don't buy crime with some of your colleagues. Just interested, as unfortunately as parts of our society gets going again, things like shoplifting, things like some of the other criminal activity that obviously we don't want to see starts to get going as well. I'm just interested in the work more generally around vulnerability, about how people guard against becoming a victim of crime, such as, you know, burglary, for example, or how you guys are supporting the community to not be a victim.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'll point people to a variety of online sources, whether that's in terms of your own website, whether it's the West Mercia Police website. There's lots of online advice as to how people can avoid being victims of crime. I mean, commonly within the hot weather, people will leave windows open in their houses, leave doors open, and you are rendering yourself vulnerable to walk-in theft. Smart water, for those with either businesses or with certain types of property, potentially is a really good solution. Areas particularly where Neighbourhood Watch groups or certain communities have used smart water amongst themselves is a good deterrent in relation to offenders, and of course it makes property uniquely identifiable. So if it were to be stolen and is then recovered, we can immediately find out who it's come from and the prosecution's important to us, but quite often to the member of the public, particularly if something's gone of sentimental value, it's getting that property back. So that enables us to do that as well. So there's a number of different means by which they can do that. But I mean, it's a bit like you referred to earlier, you know, our officers haven't disappeared for this. Some crime types have gone down, but they will start to re-emerge. But our officers have been there throughout this. They will be there throughout this. If the public need us, then contact us and we will come and help.
I'm a big supporter of We Don't Buy Crime and the whole problem-solving agenda to get ahead of the curve and stop the victims in the first place. And I'm just interested in something I just want to raise next around road safety. I, like many people, noticed a dramatic drop of vehicles on the road, especially during the most stringent part of lockdown. We've seen in recent weeks, obviously, more and more traffic, and indeed yesterday, I think it was, I was in a queue of traffic, which was almost unheard of in recent months. During that time as well, we saw a dramatic drop in the people killed or seriously injured in the roads, and I know as a force we didn't get past many weeks before without having somebody lose their lives on our roads across the force area. As the traffic starts to get going again, it's often raised with me by communities about fear around speeding and the impact of roads. Just an insight into a bit of the work that your teams do across the 3 areas in the north around not only tackling the antisocial nature of it, but also the harmful behaviour that leads people to lose their lives or be seriously injured.
Yeah, and you know, people are far more likely to lose their life through a road traffic collision than they are through a homicide or a murder, where sometimes the attention is taken in policing terms by criminal loss of life, whereas actually the biggest risk in terms of losing life would be through driving. So we focus on the fatal fall, we focus on seatbelts, we focus on speeding, drink drive and drug driving. A speeding campaign was run very recently, and all the local policing areas and our roads policing assets contributed in order to go very much on some education on that, but equally a lot of enforcement in relation to it, because it's one of those areas of business where you know, people ought to understand what the speed limits are, and people ought to know that you have to drive within them. So if you drive at significant excess speed, I say significant in terms of officers have an element of discretion, and quite often it's the manner of driving which is more important necessarily than the headline speed number. But while officers have some discretion, if you speed at all, you have to accept that you render yourself potentially liable for prosecution. Currently today we have begun an enforcement campaign around seatbelts. So, you know, wear your seatbelts, and go back to discussing earlier and trying to explain the why, and you get more compliance if you say why. You know, within our force area in the last 3 years, I think it is, we've had 12 deaths on the roads that can directly be attributed to the individual not wearing a seatbelt when they're in the car, and a further 33 people who suffered life-changing injuries. So in the last 3 years, 45 families have had their lives changed forever because someone didn't put a seatbelt on when they got into the car. And again, we take the approach of the public are adults and treat them as such, but people know what the law is in relation to seatbelts, and if you don't wear one, expect to get stopped and expect to get a ticket, and that will cost you £100. If you're taken to court, it will cost you £500. So bottom line is belt up in relation to those. We're also, that wasn't, to be fair, that wasn't my line, I stole that off.
That's nearly as old as I am, Mark.
Yeah, that was borrowed, I'm afraid. So just finally, just giving some mention to our community speed watch. So that's something we're trying to encourage and start up a bit more in North Worcestershire. So for people who might be listening who aren't familiar with that, effectively that would be members of the public who volunteer, and we'd need a minimum of sort of 6 volunteers within a particular community. So they can bring to our attention if they've got concerns regarding speeding in their area. And without getting too technical, I'm afraid it has to be a 30-mile-an-hour zone or a 40-mile-an-hour zone. But if they've got concerns about speeding in their area, then we can come along, we'll do a bit of preparatory work, and if those concerns we think are borne out, then we can give them some training, we can give them some high visibility gear, we can give them some equipment by which they can measure the speed of vehicles. Then what we ask them to do is to complete a log and monitor speeding within their local community, which gives us more information regarding the problem. It also has a direct impact on people who are speeding, and the evidence is that you see someone in high vis standing 200 yards down the road, you immediately kind of slow down. And then that can act as a platform to do further enforcement activity if that then becomes necessary. So I think there's in the same way that we like to give the public, treat them as adults and give them personal responsibility for their own lives, similarly, you know, the police service are limited in terms of the resources we've got, albeit those resources are going up, which is very, very welcome. But there's still a lot that the public can do through volunteering to help themselves and help contribute towards their own community. So with schemes like Community Speedwatch exist, we would very much encourage people to join and get engaged with them.
So that Community Speedwatch is a great way that local communities can assist where appropriate in that fight. And also on my website, there is a pot of money for small road schemes, the Safer Roads Fund. So West Mercia PCC, if you pop that into your search engine, there's a very easy grant scheme. And indeed, all it needs is the support of the local PCC ambassador and the superintendent. And it allows funding of small schemes such as village gates, vehicle activated signs, and those kinds of things. Tracy, did I see you indicating?
Yeah, only really because when Mark was talking about Community Speedwatch, and previously you mentioned Neighbourhood Watch, and it was that role actually of residents in the sort of policing environment. And I think that's one thing that we saw under the sort of previous you know, COVID pandemic, was that absolute surge in community support and community engagement with each other. And it was just a message about carrying that on now, because you've now met your neighbours, you know who they are. We've seen, and through your grant scheme, John, we've seen people getting shopping for neighbours, prescriptions, newspapers, all sorts, walking dogs, all sorts of things. And it was just really following that, taking that forward, that you now know who your vulnerable neighbours are in your community. You know them, you've met them. And it's really that about having those eyes, you know, in the streets, because there will never be a police officer next door to every single house, but there's nearly always a neighbour. So if you see something that's wrong, that doesn't look quite right for you, just take 5 minutes and just think. And if it isn't right, then phone that through on 101, you know, presuming it's not an emergency. And it was that community spirit really, just carrying that on.
It has been quite impressive these last few months, seeing that community spirit to come together. Rachel, obviously you've got responsibility for the wider policing area, and indeed in the executive you've got the biggest portfolio with the most money and the most members of staff and officers. As lockdown starts to ease and we get a bit more of our normality back, what's your aspiration as an ACC for local policing around the mission out here in the different LPAs on keeping our communities safe? What are your priorities?
Well, I think you touched on some of them earlier on, actually, John. You know, we much prefer prevention rather than cure, and it's very much trying to work in particular together with our partners, be that our statutory partners like the local authorities, children's services, or actually, and Tracy, you touched on this, our volunteer community, and you know, third sector, faith groups, and so on and so forth, to work much more cohesively together to help identify and address vulnerability when we see it earlier. Be that vulnerability in the context of vulnerable individuals or vulnerable communities, and working together. I've seen some wonderful work in Train around how rural communities in particular have the ability now through WhatsApp and various technologies to be very much more in contact with each other. And our traditional neighbourhood watch functions are becoming very much more agile as we move into the technological space as well. So prevention, making sure that we consolidate and bring together members of the public to help us become much more robust at preventing crime in the first instance is where my priorities lie. But then also making sure that those that do fall victim to crime, that we provide, again, with our partners, the best opportunities for positive outcomes through the criminal justice system, if that's appropriate, alternatively diversion, if they're sort of in the early throes of criminality, for example, but also to ensure that victims get the necessary support they need to ensure actually their lives aren't transformed for the worse, but we very much improve their lives thereafter.
Good, and absolutely for me ticks all the boxes of what my police and crime plan aims to deliver. And for me, and Mark referred to it before, as the resources that the police have rise, and we've seen over £35 million more spent per year than we did 4 years ago. With those resources, I want to make sure we, of course, give a better service when crime has happened, of course, but also that more resource getting ahead of the curve. And the best victim strategy in my mind is always to not be a victim in the first place. And whether it be the most serious of crimes that you guys have to deal with, all the way through to something that's seen as more trivial, but actually could impact hugely on some people's lives. I'm going to draw to a close in a moment. We have had one question in, or it's more of a statement in advance from a member of the public, and they just wanted to say a huge thank you from my family and myself for keeping us safe in our community. Thank you for being there throughout this entire time of upheaval in our world. Your job is not one I envy. With some of the trash that you have to deal with on a daily basis, you are valued and appreciated. Thanks all. Hats off to you all, with a small kiss on the end. And for me, whilst I might not have chosen the kiss on the end in this particular forum, I think that very heartfelt message is a sincere one. I think the public overall are supportive of the policing mission. They are supportive of the actions that you take to keep us safe day in and day out. That doesn't mean they don't rightly, and I rightly, hold you to account, and indeed are critical sometimes when it's wrong, and indeed want to make sure that we can learn from when it's gone wrong. But I think overall, the way that West Mercia Police has responded and adapted to supporting the community, especially during the recent times, shows, I think, the very ethos at the heart of the service, which is serving the public, and one that you and your colleagues should be proud of. And Mark, I just wanted to say thank you to you and your teams in North Worcestershire for that work in what has been very challenging times over the last 3 months. And as you rightly pointed out earlier, it's not over yet. We don't know when it will be over, but that system of our police being there for us in good times, bad times, and in very difficult times absolutely has stead us in good stead. So a big heartfelt thank you from me on behalf of the community. Really, now's just an opportunity, if there's anything you wanted, Mark or Rachel, to leave in the minds of our community, any final messages in terms of either about staying safe this summer or other community messages. Mark, I don't know if you've got anything.
Yeah, I think for me, I would say throughout this, albeit people have been more restricted and been more within their homes, we haven't gone away. Our officers are still there. They were there before this happened if the public needed them. They've been there throughout if the public need them, and they'll be there in the future if the public need them. So if you're a member of the public and you need us, if we need to support you, then contact us, call us, and we will always be there to help. I think as lockdown eases, take it easy, enjoy yourselves, enjoy the freedoms as they come back, be sensible, have a great time doing it. And I think if everybody adopts that attitude, then things will go smoothly. And if they don't, then my officers will be there to do what's necessary to put that right. But I think we got a society of adults. We got great people in our communities, and they've been fantastic throughout this. So I just ask them, just keep doing what they've been doing so far. Follow the rules as best you can. Use your common sense, and you won't go far wrong.
Is a rumour true, Mark, that you as a local policing commander and have got your rain sticks out praying for a little bit of rain assistance on Saturday night to help sure it goes smoothly?
Yeah, I might have looked at the weather for Saturday, and at the moment, if it stays the way it's forecasted, I'll be quite comfortable with that, yeah.
Rachel, is there anything from you as the final?
Just endorse everything Mark says, and just to reiterate, we keep people safe better when we work together with communities. So let's all work together, rally round, and ensure that everybody has a safe future in the context of COVID, but more broadly, you get the opportunity to enjoy yourselves in a safe environment over the course of the coming weekend and thereafter.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight on our latest in a series of Facebook Lives. We are in Herefordshire tomorrow and in South Worcestershire on Thursday. So if anybody had a question that they wanted to submit, that they when they watch this back afterwards, they can either submit them and we will answer them, or if anybody listening from another policing area wanted to submit a question for either Herefordshire or South Worcestershire, you're able to do that on either below this post or indeed via our normal social media channels. So a big thank you for joining us tonight, and please do stay safe.